Okay, so today's conversation is all going to be about how to turn negative judgment and criticism into compassion. And the main thing is that we're all here to make a sincere effort to be the best version of ourselves. And having compassion instead of negative judgment to other people is central and critical to succeeding and being the best version of ourselves. So, and a lot of people do this, and people who do this don't really think they do it. We kind of deceive ourselves on this. We think negative judgment is something that everybody else does except us. Tends to be the habit. There's a lot of denial is the first sign of doing this, for sure. But let's go into this. A lot of times people continue to do this because some part of them thinks it's a good idea to do this. So why don't I'm going to throw out this question. Why is it a bad idea to judge others? Why is it a bad idea? Because we need to have enough compelling reasons why it's a bad idea before we'll ever put in the necessary effort to overcome this negative habit. Okay. So step one is we really need to maximize our motivation to transcend this. So who has a thought on why it's a bad idea to negatively judge others? Steve, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think if, let's say you just see someone in a split second and you see them maybe treat someone poorly, or they're just an a-hole, or, whatever it is, something like that. Especially if it's someone we don't know, we just maybe see someone in passing, which happens a lot, and you go, man, that guy's a jerk or whatever. In reality, we don't know what's happening, right? Did they just receive bad news? Did they just lose somebody? Did they lose their job? Did, any number of things can happen. Or, has life just stacked so much negativity against them that they don't know how to unstack it, and it's just kind of reached a boiling point. And I just know for myself, certainly fatigue can play into having a shorter temper, or those types of things, and so that can definitely happen for people. And a lot of times we don't know what's going on, and even the people around us, where we don't know the context or the impact of what's happening around them.
Perfect. So you nailed a big one, which is that when we do this, it reinforces self-righteousness and egotism. Because to judge others requires a high degree of arrogance. We're making a lot of assumptions. We're being so sure of something we're not so sure of because we don't know the full story. So it really starts to build up that side of ourselves, which might not be the side we want to be building up. Charmaine, do you have any thoughts on this? Why it's a bad idea to negatively judge and criticize other people?
Well, I mean, you don't really know what's going on with them, and you don't know all of the other considerations. You get just this little tiny sliver, and you make this leap to think that you know everything or you have the answer for somebody. I mean, I think it's a lot of what Steve said, but it's very true. And also, if you're coming at them with judgment, you don't have an opportunity really to speak into ways that you can help them, because they won't feel heard. It immediately puts someone on the defensive.
So you bring up a really good point in that, that judged people become more hostile. It's only the love and mercy and compassion that reforms people. It's our only hope, right? And furthermore, it's harder to make friends. If you want to make friends, you have to be friendly. As Peace Pilgrim once said, I'm not sure if you guys know who Peace Pilgrim is. She's American, so she's from your country. Anyway, she was a modern day saint who walked across the US for over 28 years and only had 3 possessions, and she was speaking about inner peace and stuff. You can check out her stuff on YouTube. They've got some documentaries about her, but extremely inspirational life that she had. But she says, if you want to make friends, you got to be friendly, right? Being friendly means they're more likely to be friendly back. So absolutely, it blocks our connection with them.
We also don't understand what it means to be friendly or being friendly. We think we're being friendly, and other people don't hear it that way. I think Tony Robbins says like women try, like they think they're coaching. We think we're being helpful, and it comes across critical. And this is what led to my trigger yesterday. A friend of mine was coming back from his mom's house and had to go much further to go to his house and drop off food, only to come back up and go to the store with me. And I'm like, I wish you would have just told me. You could have stopped at my house, put the stuff in my refrigerator. We could have gone to the store because I live in the middle, right? Just made total sense, And he felt criticized. And I'm just like, why would you think you couldn't, leave stuff in my refrigerator? Why wouldn't you have said something to me? And I'm just thinking here, I'm showing you have this value to me. And of course you could do that. And he felt totally criticized. He's like, you saying that's going to make me less likely to ever do that. And I just thought it was crazy. But again, here, I think I'm saying you have all this value to me. And that is not what he was hearing at all. So I might sound friendly, but it's not how it was received.
Yeah, for sure. If you're trying to give some helpful advice and somebody can, if they're sensitive, if they're on that end of the spectrum, not thick-skinned, very sensitive, oftentimes people can turn anything into a threat or a slight. Another thing we need to be careful of, similar to what you mentioned, but different, is that there's a self-justification people use when they're mean and cruel. Not that that's what you were doing at all, but sometimes people are very mean and cruel, and they say, I'm only trying to help people be better. And so they justify it, and they think they need to go out there and criticize and tarnish people's character and humiliate them. And then they think the logic and the reasoning is that I'm doing a social justice for humanity because I'm helping people be better. And the truth of the matter is that if that's your motive, there's probably better ways. So,
or they say they're a truth teller, right?
Yeah. So anyway, Chris, do you have any thoughts? Why is it a bad idea to judge others?
Judging others in general or in a negative way?
In a negative way. Negative judgment.
A negative judgment is sometimes, in general, making those type of judgments is good to make that assumption rather than thinking. So it might be easier for me to just quickly judge somebody on the fly than sit down, ask them what's going on, figure something out. Last night I was dropping off a pair of shoes literally at 7:30 at night. I was exhausted. And the shoe didn't quite fit this woman. I didn't get it fitting, somebody else did. And she was crying, she was complaining. And I'm like, I can always leave. And it got to that point for me. I was on my last switch because it was the end of the day. And she later said that I didn't miss my pain meds, and I was really, I was in pain. And I told her, thank you for clarifying that, because I didn't, even though you had said that before, it would click in. I appreciated the fact that she could clarify to me why she was crying, why she was upset. And this didn't help. But she let me know what was going on with her so I could be more empathetic to her. I said, I didn't realize you were in distress. I did not realize you were actively in pain. Are you okay? So it allowed me to redirect myself to serve her better than to be stuck in an immediate, exhausted, short-sighted vision of what was going on and just do a quick negative judgment because I didn't really look deeper into it. A couple other issues, it might be somebody trying to control the agenda or the narrative. That by intentionally giving a negative judgment, like I had someone say, you're like 300 pounds. Like, no, I'm not. So it's but really, I think it was to get me to be more peaceful. But it was something to just control the narrative. The assumption was to control the narrative and used as a technique, a specific technique the person was using. We're talking about trying to be friendly and being helpful, and sometimes misconstrued as such. Some people use that as a specific tool to get a specific response to negotiate or control the narrative or control the conversation. So sometimes they use it intentionally.
So just a quick heads up, Chris. It's really loud there, and we're having a really hard time hearing you. So I might get you to throw some of the comments in the chat, just because you can't hear what we're hearing, but it's really loud.
Yeah.
I'm gonna summarize what I think said, and you just nod, okay, if I nailed it or whatever. But basically this, it's a reason it's a bad idea to judge others is because it takes up energy and focus that could be used somewhere more useful, right? We could be using that same energy and focus in a more useful way. We become emotionally and cognitively hobbled when we start to negatively judge people. I think also it can create an opening for evil influence, right? It can be, judgment can be false reasoning, parading as something more elevated, but it sacrifices our highest potential by taking our focus off of our own duty to make moral progress. And I think one of the best attitudes to have is that we just give so much of our focus to the improvement of ourselves that we have no time to judge others. And I think that's a much better approach to life than spending time evaluating everybody else. As the Buddha once said, he said, don't give your attention to what others do or fail to do. Give it to what you do or fail to do. Right? And then, in the Bible, it also says, why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but you don't notice the log in your own eye? So this kind of focus blocks us from reaching for our higher reality. And in that way can serve to be a great obstacle on our path to spiritual unfoldment. So, Joel, do you have any thoughts on why is it a bad idea to negatively judge others?
I think a lot of the reasons have already been covered, but it limits your ability to help them because they're not going to look to you as someone that has necessarily a higher path of wisdom. I know if I, find somebody that seems to me to take a higher road than being judgmental, I usually want to learn more from them or talk with them more. It doesn't put up that wall right away. And also we've talked in the past about how if you want to have a better quality of life, you have to ask a better quality question. I feel like it's the same thing with judgment, is that you have to elevate the conversation beyond just menial superficial level stuff if you want to actually get somewhere with someone. And at the end of the day, there's a saying that it doesn't matter what someone thinks about you because it doesn't have to do with you, it has to do with them, and vice versa. What I think about somebody else doesn't have to do with them, it's about me. So at the end of the day, it doesn't even really matter what I think about somebody anyway. It's always just passing judgment's kind of a superficial lens to look through that just kind of limits their potential. If anything, we should be acknowledging the successes that they're doing. That's a parenting technique of if you focus on the junk, you get more junk. And if you focus on the good stuff and, pay attention and, give them high fives more when they're doing the stuff you want them to do, then you get more of that. So it's where focus goes, energy flows.
Awesome. And so a couple takeaways we can take from that is that it disturbs our mental peace because when we're judging, it's more of a disturbing energy and disturbing headspace to be in, so it blocks, it steals away our inner peace, right? Also, if we're walking around judging other people, the tendency is that we assume they're judging us. There's a lot of projection that happens. So, and, a big source of suffering in life is our unwillingness to accept other people as they are and release our expectations of how we want them to be. A lot of times life would be easier for us if people were more advanced than they are. So we resent them for not being as advanced and we use judgment to get that frustration across, right? And I think another thing too is it actually blocks our own ability to accept ourselves. Because when we judge others, we develop more of a judging mindset. And that judgmental mindset has a way of turning on us. Okay? But if we are training ourselves to be more accepting of other people and more compassionate, we develop those skills to give ourselves compassion. And then the last one I would say, my answer. So I guess that was your answer, my interpretation of your answer, Joel. And then the last one I would say is that there's a karmic retribution to it. You know, whatever you judge in others, you must eventually experience yourself in order to learn compassion. So when we negatively judge others, there's a karmic reckoning that comes with it, that soul must face eventually, so that you're subject to your own self-condemnation. And that comes from Swami Kriyananda in the book Light Bearer. But also even Jesus said, you know, condemn not lest ye be condemned, or judge not lest ye be judged. And some people interpret that as applying to reincarnation in multiple lifetimes. The ones that you are harshest on, you will end up being like in a future lifetime, so that you can learn that spiritual lesson, right? Okay, now, there are a number of attitude shifts we can make that help us be better at compassion and acceptance. Okay, I'm going to talk about what they are, and then we'll share some ideas. So one is we want to create a compelling argument on why it's best to love everyone the way they are. Two, we want to create a compelling argument on why we are not qualified to judge others. Three, we want to be able to create the attitude that is acknowledging how we are similar to them, that they're like a spiritual brother or sister. Four, we want to be able to look at life like an experiment. And it's just an experiment, so we're not taking all of our performances too seriously. Five, we want to be able to come up with a good argument for why we all deserve respect as we journey through life. Six, we want to be able to see others as a work in progress. Seven, we want to be able to recognize how our negative judgment is a projection of what's going on inside of us. And then eight is we want to think about how we might change ourselves in order to change the situation. And then the final piece, which will be the best piece, will be what should we do if we find ourselves criticizing or negatively judging others? And that's going to be like our walk away once we kind of establish the foundational attitudes leading into that. Okay, so number one is going to be this. It's going to be, why is it best to love everyone the way they are? And I'll just leave it open to whoever just wants to throw an idea out there. Otherwise, I'll throw some perspectives out there. Chris, so we'll get you to type your answers in. I can read it out so that, yeah. So anyone have any thoughts? Why is it best just to love and accept everyone the way they are? I mean, I'll start off with one idea. Loving them the way they are doesn't mean we condone bad behavior. It doesn't make us a doormat. You know, you don't have to negatively judge somebody in order to still keep a safe distance. You know, you still have to put criminals in prison. That's not negative judgment necessarily. It can still be love and compassion, right? Hey, we're preventing you from doing more harm, right? And we can love them and care for them as we do so. You know, there are people who go to the prisons and, you know, speak with the prisoners and help coach them and guide them and give them love and compassion. Michael Singer, who wrote The Untethered Soul, has done that for many, many years, right? It's like, but we can still set those healthy boundaries and have justice for the actions people have taken, right? And if people are acting in a way that can create harm on others, we still must impose minimum necessary force to protect against their actions. You know, so it doesn't mean that we have to negatively judge and criticize to keep a safe distance. No, we should still do that, but we can love them as we do. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's best to love and accept them the way they are. We're not exposing ourselves necessarily to their harm, right? I'll go again, I guess. Or Steve, do you want to go?
Yeah, one I was just thinking is, you know, when we are dealing with people, we're dealing with them in a point in time on their journey, right? And like you had said, you know, we've all kind of leveled up in the last year, but depending on when we cross paths with someone, you know, I mean, we're at different spots, you know, along the way, and sometimes we have setbacks that, you know, we kind of revert out of what we know or the practices that we're trying to, you know, put in place. And so when we're, you know, dealing with someone, it's in a point in time in their experiment, and the same goes for us as well, right? So it could be a good point in time for us, or I've had plenty of dealings with people when it's been, you know, not such a good point in time, you know, in my life. And so you know, right now it's easy to look at someone and say, well, you should automatically know all this Tony Robbins stuff that I clearly automatically had to learn a year ago, right? Of just certain things, because sometimes people just don't have the skill sets to deal with some of the stuff that's happened to them, or the limiting beliefs they've had, or, you know, those types of things. And so it's easy for us when we've spent a year really kind of going after it and trying to level up ourselves. If someone else hasn't had the same opportunity as that, then, you know, it's not fair. They wouldn't be at the same spot that we think, you know, that we're at.
Yeah, excellent. I love this point, because really what you're getting at is that somebody who is making mistakes or wrong choices actually deserves more compassion, not less. Okay, so we have compassion for people when they're physically sick. Like if somebody's physically sick or injured, we have compassion. But yet we somehow haven't developed that mainstream attitude to have as much compassion when people lack mental clarity. All right, because it's just a different type of illness. It's not physical, but you know, you would still want, if you have an illness that's creating harm in your life, you would still want the support and compassion of the community, right? So they deserve, the more wrong they are, the more compassion they deserve, not less. Judgment harms, love heals, right? So great point there. Anyone else have anything to add on this one? I would add also, it takes less energy to just love everything. Like rather than calculating, I like this, I don't like this, this is wrong, this is stupid, blah, blah, blah. Just love everything. It's just such an easier way to live life. Like why go around judging and everything, criticizing everything everybody says on the news and everything else? It's just, you can be so much happier when you just love instead of judge. It benefits us to just love instead of judge. It leads to a peaceful heart, just acceptance without judgment, right?
Well, it puts you in a better place to actually help someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And then even if we can't help somebody, we can still honor that everybody plays a role in the human story. You know, you can't have cops without robbers. You can't have saints without sinners, or heroes without villains. You know, the creator has a unique song to sing through each one of us, and each moment is unique. So it helps us just to appreciate the novelty of creation, and appreciate the good that's still in all of us, no matter what's being expressed at the moment. We're all capable of the highest good, right? So, and then another quote that I heard was that the secret of love is loving God and each other. Thus, you'll always feel drawn to the divine perfection behind the human error. It comes from Swami Kriyananda in a book. And I thought that was a really good quote as well that kind of hits it home. But that's our challenge and test here. Now, number two, we're going to go on to number two is, why am I not qualified to judge others? And I think we've already hit on this one a little bit. People have said, you know, we don't know their full story. We don't know what they're going through. Everyone's going through something. We just don't know what it is. Everybody's dealing with a lot. They don't have all the answers to everything in their life. It's a struggle, you know, and who are we to say what they should or shouldn't be like in this moment? You know, do we know everything about them? Are we promoting ourselves into a position that we're not qualified for? We don't know what's best for people in this moment across all space and time. Sometimes it was the biggest mistakes we made that led to the greatest growth and the greatest development of character strength and virtue. And people had to live through it. So who are we to say you can't have that learning experience, you know, of learning things through your mistakes, right?
I think it's a great point, because a lot of times you try to save people the process. I've even noticed that in parenting with kids, like you want to sometimes save them having to go through stuff, but at the same time, that's a great teacher. And if you never fail, then you never learn anything. So sometimes it's good to, you know, go through challenges and to have failures.
Yeah. And I think it's also, judgment can only really come from a basis of actual knowledge, right? But if we don't know everything, how can we actually make a judgment? Like, we're not really qualified. We have to have actual knowledge to make that judgment, you know? So I don't think, and until we've perfected ourselves, I think judging ourselves is the only beneficial focus in the matter, right? Until we perfected ourselves. Like, why are we sidestepping and bypassing ourselves, right?
But it's so much easier just to spend energy focusing on other people than ourselves, because we don't have to deal with anything of our own nature.
Yeah, it's like spiritual junk food. It's sweet in the moment, and then it just rots you to the core, right? Like, but I think also, you know, we need to just zooming out and with keeping mindful that many good things come out of bad situations. The bad things, the big mistakes and wrong actions, it leads to new wisdom, new understanding, new experiences, new connections. We learn more through these mistakes than we do through our successes, right? We often learn the right way of living by having lived the wrong way. So we shouldn't be so quick to judge people for living the wrong way, because if you pay attention, the wrong way can become the right way. Suffering plus reflection equals progress, right? So who are we to step in and interrupt that timeless classic process by saying this shouldn't be happening right now, right? That's why I think that the whole idea of judgment just has so much, when we do it, there's just such an ego component that we feel that we're able to see things so much better than everyone else. And that's why I think it's a habit that we should definitely make a sincere effort to go to do our best to transcend. Any other thoughts on number 2? How are we not qualified? So number 3 is to ask ourselves, how are we similar to them? How are they like a spiritual brother or sister? We want to be able to see that similarity. Does anyone have any thoughts on this? Because this is a very specific attitude shift.
I just know that in general in life, I've always had a lot more growth when I'm able to see, like, even the people that I disagree with, like everybody that I come across, to see them as part of one big family, that they're just, you know, they're a brother, they're a sister, a mom, dad, whatever, that we're all related. Because otherwise it's always like some variation of us versus them, whether it's economically or, you know, whatever that looks like. There's like, society is always trying to show these isms, these classisms or separations, whatever it is, racism, all these isms. And when we can get away from that and just see, hey, like whoever we're sitting next to on the bus or the plane or walking down the street or wherever, that they're all just one big part of our family, it just really shifts it to where you have more of a genuine caring for people. And, you know, you want the best for them and whatever that looks like, and just have you want to be helpful and not see that separation.
Yeah, love it. I think, Charmaine?
Yeah, I think I always have the phrase in my head there, but for the grace of God go I, right? That's what I always think about. And a lot of times we think we know what we would do in someone's circumstances, but until you're actually there and until you're actually walking in that, you know, you really don't. And I always think people get jealous of other people. They're looking at one small aspect of their life, but you don't get to just pick out and cherry pick the good parts, right? You know, people are complex and there's a much broader spectrum of things going on. And I think sometimes, you know, that's where that compassion comes from. If you can think about what it would be like to be in their shoes and, you know, how challenging that might be, it kind of shifts your perspective. And especially if someone's going through something and you think you would do things differently, or you've been there before and, you know, if they just did this thing differently, it would be so much better for them. You have to respect their journey and the fact that they won't take it to heart or learn it unless they suffer through those steps. You know, everything comes through that type of work or that type of experience.
Love it. Well said. I know that, you know, there's a tendency that sometimes we see someone and we think, well, I wouldn't do that if I were them. But we should remind ourselves, I would do that if I were them because they just did that. And, you know, if I was living in their reality, with their experience, thoughts, and emotions, we would do what they did because they just did, right? Like in their reality, it's a good idea. And Dale Carnegie once said, accept that people are just how we might be under similar circumstances with similar life experience. And I think one of the things I remind myself of is that I am capable of the worst human atrocities. Because I have the capacity to think that a bad idea is a good idea. And we've all done that. We've all thought something bad was a good idea, whether it was eating that last cookie before bed or the all-you-can-eat buffet, or whether it was, deciding to trust this person at this time in our life, or take this job, or invest here or there, or whatever. There's so many times we do that, right? But also, we all have the capability of being fearful, sad, angry, greedy, jealous, whatever. And who knows how we might behave if we were subject to those emotional influences. The potential that they have lies within us, right? We're capable of not thinking clearly and making rash decisions. So acting out of desperation, ignorance, fear, selfishness, irrational impulse, especially if we were, subject to some of the hard things they've been through in their life. Who knows how we would behave if we were experiencing their mental and emotional reality, right? So excellent point. Excellent point. Steve,
Something you said
Oh,
just reminded me of something else. Narcissists view everyone as an extension of themselves, and they kind of act like the world is just like every person is out there, just some extension of themselves. They don't see people as different or separate, and so that idea that you said, if you were them, you would do exactly what they had just done. I mean, it kind of makes us very narcissistic to think that other people should behave like us. And how boring would the world be if everyone was just like us, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank goodness they aren't. One of the ways that, Chris?
At the time you're talking about that, when you're talking about that, when you're looking at somebody doing so, I would do that differently. And the only reason you're saying it is because you did it their way about 5 years ago. And you just forgot that you did it that way.
Exactly. Great point. Yeah. So, we need to relate
and
to
you
their
also
reality.
have to remember that everybody started out as a white belt.
Very well said. Very well said. It's so true. It's funny because it's humbling to be reminded of this. But, we need to relate to their reality. We all come from a different reality, right? And at one point we were on that stepping stone of understanding. The reason I kind of phrase this as looking at them like a spiritual brother or sister is because really we are all in a way pilgrims in this dimension, and we are all in a journey from ignorance to understanding at all things. And we're all at a different point in that journey. And there are inescapable stages of development. That's a big deal. It's just like if you have a little apple seed, it has to be a sapling that's frail and vulnerable, and then it's a young tree, and then eventually it's got a really strong root and it gives off goodness, right? There are inescapable stages to human development as well. But I think we should just love the ignorant as fellow travelers on the road to ultimate understanding. We're all imperfect humans making mistakes as we try to figure out how to live, right? And I think that respecting them, it's also like this. Imagine you go and you buy some food at the food court in the mall, and all of a sudden somebody just shoves into you and sends your food flying, right? You might be angry, judgmental. You might be like, hey, what'd you do that for? But what would you do if you realized this person was actually just blind? They didn't really realize what they had just done, and then you see like their walking stick thing, right? Like you might be like, oh, and you might have compassion, right? And I think in a way we need to realize that we are all in some ways blind to higher wisdom. So we stumble into each other, right? And then when we look at it that way, we can start to shift to compassion instead of judgment, because I think judgment is always saying, hey, you should have known better. And the truth is you really didn't. And you really weren't trained properly on how to live a human life. We all just kind of showed up here and we're trying to figure it out as we go, right? And everyone's doing the best they can with what they know. And when they know better, they do better. So having that attitude actually helps us, I think, find greater compassion. You know, we weren't prepared to show up and live a human life without flaw. You know, we didn't get a PhD in how to be human before we were birthed into this realm. So I think we just sometimes need to remind ourselves of that. So number 4 is kind of similar. It's like, how is life like an experiment? Right? Looking at it like this, just looking at life like an experiment. Because oftentimes we were putting way too much performance pressure for everyone to just have everything perfect all the time. Right? But like I said, it's like we're figuring it out as we go. We try different thoughts and behaviors until we discover through our real life experience what works best for us. We realize that we're happier when we're generous as opposed to being greedy. We realize that we're happier when we help people rather than blasting them and shutting them down, right? We realize we're happier when we discipline ourselves and train ourselves to see the good in people rather than fault finding all the time, right? It's just all experiments, right? But I mean, I think it's, you know, we have a duty to pay attention to the results we're getting in our experiment, but, you know, this whole world is full of people making mistakes. But we shouldn't make the mistake of assuming that we are the one exception to that, you know, which is really what we're doing when we're judging people, right? Because all of this life experience is valuable, even and especially the mistakes. They give memorable insights on how to live more skillfully. And oftentimes we have to repeat a number of these mistakes many times. How many of you have you ever made the same mistake twice? Yeah. We shouldn't assume you're only supposed to make a mistake once. Sometimes that mistake needs to be made 5 times till you get that level of pain and insight. It's like, okay, I got the lesson, right? So repeating mistakes is even a valuable learning lesson, you know? So we try to figure out how to be happy, and we seek it in countless mistaken directions, right? We suffer, we try a new direction, fail, try again. You know, this might go on through a number of lifetimes, but we all have a right to we all have a right to free will, which means we all have a right to be stupid every now and then. You know, we've got to pay the justice on our stupidity, but you know, we all have a right to be stupid. And stupid can be smart because we learn best through pain, tears, and heartbreak, I guess. So it's all just an experiment. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? How is life like an experiment? Let's go on to number 5 is, why do we all deserve respect as we journey through this life? Here's a perspective to think about. Whatever somebody's going through, you know, we might judge how they're making their life difficult and this and that, but we have to respect that at some point their soul chose that journey. That before this life happened, their soul chose these struggles because they had what it takes to endure these hardships. They were hungry to learn many hard lessons in life. We shouldn't look down on these people, but perhaps respect them that we maybe chose an easier curriculum than they did. Right? I also think that when we judge a thing, we are imposing our will on it rather than their free will. We're trying to remove their free will. We're just imposing we're interfering with their God-given right to be stupid. You know, like, confusion's not a crime. They weren't just prepared for their current life experience. Right? And it's kind of like this. I think it was Ram Dass said something like this. He said, you know, you walk through a forest and you see these trees that are like bent and twisted, and you don't judge. You just kind of accept, like, hey, that tree just didn't get enough light, so it had to like get all bent out of shape. And a lot of humans are completely bent out of shape because they didn't get enough light. And that light, I think, is elevated wisdom. Right? But we shouldn't go around judging, but just accept and appreciate it as a natural occurrence, just like the trees in the forest, right? Because then when we start judging, it creates that bondage. And And I think it generally isn't good for people, because I think people commit better to change when they come to it in their own way, in their own time, in their own understanding, rather than feeling like we force fed them with a perspective that they haven't totally bought into yet. The change often takes longer than we want. Like, just think of how long it took some of us to change our points of view on some things. Like, I think back to myself, and some of my attitudes took years to change. Even though now I look and I'm like, that was a bad attitude to have towards life in general, or that was a selfish attitude to have, or that was just a completely confused attitude to have. And I'm like, man, I held on to that attitude a long time. Right. But now I'm like, I'm convinced not to live life looking at things that way. Right. Any thoughts on it, Steve?
Well, I think, you talked about, people kind of choosing their path, right, in this life. And so, I believe that, we were in a different state before we were born. We existed, and we learned lessons through our own experience there, right? But that experience was a lot different than what we experience here. We don't know if we were bound by gravity or different things like that. We certainly have our, like our mortal physical bodies, where we're hungry, we get tired, we get injured, right? We grow old, we decay, certain things like that. And so, I think we learned lessons before, and now we're learning lessons here that are different. But you and I need to learn different things based on what we learned before we came here. We may have different things after we leave this life that we have to learn, and so I think we all are on, different, a different path, but we're all trying to go to the same place, right? If we're all spirit brothers and sisters, if we have a creator, we have a God that made us, then we're all trying to be better in life, right? Most people aren't out there trying to be worse. They're not purposely trying to find more ways to be evil, to hurt everyone around them. The world's not full of serial killers and crap like that. There's some bad people, but they just, they make bad choices sometimes. And, it's just interesting that, like, I look at my kids, and I've got, one kid that literally, do not touch the stove, it is hot. While she looks at me and just says, I will do it because I will burn myself to prove to you that you can't tell me what to do. But it is, and Chris kind of made the point too, is a lot of times, we have to remind ourselves, it's easy to say, I would not do that because I had something in my life experience that made me do that, right? Whereas this person is maybe had not had that experience, and so the choice they make looks good. And I think a lot of it really all just boils down to, we can't just give ourselves the benefit of the doubt and come down harsh on everyone else. We've got to give all of us the benefit of the doubt, because most of us are doing the best we can with what we have, or what we've learned up to this point.
Your story about the stove and whatever reminded me of a moment I remember from when I was 4 years old. I was in the bath and I had this blue plastic cup, and it was a bubble bath, and I filled it with bubble bath. It was full of bubbles, and I looked at it, and my mom said, do not drink that. And then I thought, do not? Now I am. Now, and then I drank it, and I was like, bah, like this. And let me tell you, I have never tried to drink bubble bath since that day when I was 4 years old. But I did it because she told me not to. And I'm just like, well, now you got me thinking about doing it. And now that seems like a better idea. I was just kind of like looking at it fascinated. You're like, do not drink. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about drinking it. Good idea. It's already in a cup, right?
Well, and I think too, like that you just reminded me of an experience I had when I was little. Of my mom gave me the choice of doing my chores before I went to go play with friends, or playing and coming back. And I was pretty young, so I decided to go play with my friends. And then you know, we're having a great time and I get a phone call that I have to leave while all my friends get to stay, you know, at the one person's house, and I have to go home and clean the toilet. And that pissed me off so much that I hardly ever do that. I try to get my work done first so that I can go play and not have that hang over me. But you know, that was like, to me, and it wasn't like there was any great consequence, but I just didn't like that feeling of, I was with my friends and they all got to continue on and I had to go do something unpleasant, when if I'd done it before, I could have stayed with them. And so that's just a lesson that is kind of shaped a lot of what I do. So I try to find the most unpleasant or the most difficult or the thing I don't want to do the most and get it out of the way so that I can kind of continue on, and then everything else doesn't seem as bad.
Mhm.
But a lot of people don't operate like that,
Mhm.
right? That's just what works for me. And there's not really any consequence to it. It's just how it's one of my, you know, experiments of my life of how I like to operate.
Yeah. Excellent. I think another point too with this is that it's important that we recognize that people are not their behaviors, right? Like it was once said, I think Tony Robbins said it, like, there are no unresourceful people, there are only unresourceful states. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because once fully motivated, who knows what people are capable of learning? You know, if they acquire breakthrough wisdom and understanding, how much personal responsibility they could take, how they could be 10 out of 10 disciplined, they could be 10 out of 10 focused, they have the potential, right? Wrong directions can be set right. Past lies can be erased by now telling the truth. Narrowness can be exploded with expansiveness. Remember that everybody is a highly capable learner with high potential. And, you know, a saint is a sinner that never gave up. So I'm a big fan of respecting the saintly potential in everybody. Respecting their saintly potential. And I think we can always take a look at people and we can just say, look, imagine to yourself what their highest potential is and ask yourself yes or no if they're still evolving. And that's about the only judgment we should make, because the answer is going to be yes. So we should just respect them as a work in progress rather than ridiculing an erring person. We should realize that the potential of the creator is sleeping within that soul right now, ready to be awoken. Right?
And I think we don't expect ourselves to finish that journey in this lifetime. We expect to always be continually improving. So who are we to think that someone should already be at the end of that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do a talk at one point. We'll do a talk on reincarnation. It's been said that that was specifically removed at one point from the church teachings in order to create a sense of urgency to help the business of the church. But instead, it kind of dampened people's enthusiasm because one life is not long enough to learn it all. Right. So we'll do a talk about that a little bit later on, really do a deep dive on that subject, because it's really hard to find peaceful acceptance with life and reality if you don't have some sort of acknowledgement of the potential for that to be a part of our reality. Steve?
I was just going to say real quick to finish up on the respect thing is, you know, if I believe in God and that he created me, then he created you too, right? And he created my neighbor and the person down the street and the person driving next to me on the freeway. So just by virtue of that, you know, we're required to give respect. We don't always, but you know, by virtue, if God created me, then he created my fellow man. And so I've got to give them respect.
You're respecting the creator.
I need to remind myself of that. I forget that quite frequently, but You know, I mean, that's almost just one of those, you know, I think, therefore I am. If God created me, he created everyone else too. So by definition, I have to show respect to God by respecting his creation.
Yeah, to love the creation is to love the creator, right? And I think that's deep down one of the main reasons we're all here. Let's go on to number 7, which is, how is my negative judgment a projection of what's going on inside of me? Being able to see that, right? Because, you know, it's been said that negative judgment is always a projection of who you are. There's something in you that prevents you from seeing clearly what's happening right now. You know, there's lots of things in this world that are wrong, but they don't mean that much to you. Why does this thing mean so much to you? That's an important question to ask, right? Because there's lots of very ego-based reasons behind criticism. Like, the most critical people are typically getting caught in the ego trap. There's something very personal about the thing they're condemning, right? So, you know, I think there's that whole saying, like, where, you know, if you point at someone, you realize that, you know, you've got 3 fingers pointing back at you. It's a good reminder that when you're blaming others, you're denying an aspect of yourself. You're denying the aspect of yourself that's creating that judgment, that part of you that needs healing, right? So, any thoughts on this one?
Yes. I think before, when I was talking about people sometimes use negative judgment as a tool or a manipulative technique, I think this is the source of it, that they're really trying to manipulate your ego. It is your ego that takes the bait and then lashes out, because that's an inflamed area of your life, or that's a pain that you're going through that's inflamed, that they're poking at because they're trying to get a response out of you to take advantage of that response. So when you're talking about how that the ego gets involved, and that's kind of the shift that I had from Sunday to today, is that my ego isn't involved anymore. I'm trying to get involved, but it's no longer there. I'm no longer playing that game anymore. So it has to do with the ego being tempted, being baited, being basically brought into the argument through negative judgment. And that is the part that is responding. You're right, is the ego, because the ego is about areas of pain and areas of inflammation in your life.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. Very good point. A good simple way to look at it is, you have your human nature and your divine nature. And ego is over-identification and attachment to the human identity, and forgetfulness of your spiritual identity. Because from that spiritual perspective, what's going on is actually, you realize, like, a bad day for the ego is a good day for the soul, right? Good day for the soul, not so much a good day for the ego, right? But we realize that these things that we're actually struggling with are actually really good for us. We shouldn't get too attached to this human nature, human identity. It tends to be the source of all our suffering in the end, right?
And also, one thing about the ego is being protective over those areas. So just like a mother would protect its young, when that area gets stimulated or attacked, the ego will come and protect that by lashing out. So it is a protective response from the ego.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think that there's 2 good questions to ask when we realize that the ego is getting involved. And once again, when the ego gets involved, let's all be reminded that we make terrible decisions. Okay? When the ego gets involved, we always have. Why am I afraid is question 1. Question 2 is, and how can I overcome that fear? What would it take to overcome that fear? Right? Why am I afraid? And how can I overcome that fear? When you're criticizing somebody, why am I afraid is the question we should ask. Because that's the answer is a question.
So I think one other thing as far as criticizing other people, I think we're more aware of things where we feel like we have our own challenges. And so that's part of the reason that's what we spotlight and see, because we're afraid that we have those weaknesses. And then when we're able to point it out in someone else, that lets us say, okay, I'm not so bad, right? It gives us that excuse to not look at ourselves and think, well, they're much worse than me, so I must be okay in this area.
That's the old Queen of Hearts philosophy of living. I think it's from Alice in Wonderland, where she's like off with their heads for everybody. And it's like, if you cut off everyone else's head, that's what your ego wants. So you appear taller, right? So it's like, it's soothing for the ego to do that, but not necessarily when we kind of, intelligent people do something called a cost benefit analysis. Okay. When we do a cost benefit analysis of living our lives that way, we would realize it'd be foolish to continue to do that once we know better. Right? It'd be like, well, wait a minute, I should just be putting all my focus on myself. That's the only good use of my time right now. Like, I am not qualified, nor am I helping matters to negatively judge and criticize them. Right? There's no real payoff there. In fact, it just creates a reality that's more troubling and disturbing to me, that I'm surrounded with all these incompetent people. Like, I just created that story in my head. Now I'm living in this situation, right? So, excellent point. Let's go on to number 8, which is, how might I change myself to change the situation, right? So think about it this way. Like, when we want to change a situation, the only thing we can truly change is ourselves, right? But when we change ourselves, the situation changes in our reality. So I think a really good point here is that we need to really pay attention, because self-awareness can have a curative effect. We need to pay attention to even these unspoken judgments that are going on in our head. You know, you see somebody walking down the street, or somebody in the store was really like kind of harsh and rude or whatever. Like, we just need to pay attention to self-awareness leads to self-regulation. You can't fix what you don't acknowledge is broken, right? So we can't fix what we can't see. And then I think when we do this, to make a sincere effort, it really requires like a twice a day check-in. People get the dosage wrong when it comes to changing aspects of our character. I find that people really underprescribe it, and hence it doesn't have a healing benefit. It's like healing medicine. It's like, okay, you're supposed to do this twice a day, and everyone just does it like once a week if they remember. And then they just stay sick, right? And it's like when coaching ourselves and healing our character and everything else, I think what I've noticed is twice a day is the frequency that where magic starts to happen. And I think it could be a 2 times a day, a check-in, like, who am I being? You know, who do I want to be? You know, am I being somebody that's out there criticizing and judging? Who do I want to be? No, I want to be the one that's like loving and accepting. So the focus is just on myself, right? And then question 3 would be, what should I try doing next? And then bring in some of these other things we talked about, right? But just having something like that to check in with, right? And I think when we do that, then we can start to create a shift, because then we're not just living on automatic reactions. We can kind of say, you know, somebody does something that we really think is wrong, maybe we can say, wow, that's fascinating. I wonder what makes people do what they do. I wonder what it's like to be them. Just turn it into curiosity. Or we can just treat it like a balloon, like just a helium balloon. Just, you notice the judgment, just let it go. Like, don't hold on to it. Practice observing without judgment, right? If you just practice releasing it, then eventually that'll take precedence over the ingrained habit of negative judgment, right? Just start one day at a time. Try not to judge anybody one day, right? Then maybe aim for a 2-day record. but we need to be checking in on ourselves for this, right? I also think that a good way to do this is to apply the compassion you have to animals to people. I mean, why do we not judge some of those animals out there? Like, people love lions. It's like lions tear people to shreds. Like, why do you love people love hippos? They made the game Hungry Hippos. You know how many human beings hippos kill every year? And crocodiles. People love crocodiles. They hunt, crocodiles hunt humans, right? But it's we don't negatively judge these animals because, you know what? They have needs. They have impulses and natural tendencies. They don't know any better, right? Why don't we take that attitude and apply it to other humans? Why do we have to put them on this, place these extremely high unrealistic expectations on anyone else, right? We should share that type of compassion, you know, instead of expecting them to be more advanced than they are, just because life would be easier for our ego if everyone was more competent than they are, right? Some people are grown up in age, but they are infantile in wisdom. They're like human children, right? Like if a kid picks up a knife and hits you with it, right? You wouldn't try to kill that kid in return. No, you just realize what just happened. And just like having the look of a concerned parent, you need to realize that adults kind of do the same thing. They're infantile in their wisdom, right? That's why Jesus said, when they nailed him to the cross, he said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." He knew that although these were adults, they were infantile in their wisdom, right? So it's not, that's why I think that this is a good attitude to have. It's really the attitude Jesus had when people killed him. He's like, they're just children in their understanding, right? So we want to be able to make it a game. Catch your judgmental thoughts, turn it into compassion, make it a game. So here's what we should do. We should think about, what should we do next if we find ourselves criticizing or negatively judging others? Any idea is applicable here. We're just going to throw ideas out. This is the last part of the conversation. We're going to throw ideas out there. What should we do? What could we do? Anything you come up with is legit, as an experiment. Any thoughts? Charmaine, you want to go first?
Well, if you're in the middle of it, I think you should apologize. Start there, right? Realize you got ahead of yourself and own it, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Start judging yourself instead.
Stop it. Well, you know what? Here's something that I applied this. Yogananda, in the book Metaphysical Meditations, he once said, you know, if I find myself criticizing others, I will first talk loudly against myself before others. And I applied this once. I was in a staff room and somebody was bringing up something that somebody else on the team was doing. And I was kind of like a part of the conversation. But being a part of the conversation, I realized like I was playing a role in this negative judgmental energy. And I thought, I'm going to interrupt this right now. And I said, hold on, I got to interrupt this. I have to tell you guys about something so stupid about me. I keep leaving the cupboard doors open at home. It's like the biggest issue in my marriage right now. And I just started to like criticize myself. And I took all of the energy off of it. And then I thought, you know what? That felt good. That felt good to just take my ego, throw it out there, and then I thought, you know, this is what I got to do. If I find myself negatively judging others, I have to then vomit out one of my own shortcomings right away to teach myself not to do that. And then in doing that, I feel better in the long run. I'm like, okay. But yeah, so that might be an approach. Steve, any thoughts?
One, I was just thinking, kind of with the stuff that was going on with work, you know, we had kind of some pretty significant changes there. And, you know, one of my coworkers said, well, this person lied about this thing, right? This person's a liar. I said, you need to stop right there. That is a possible explanation, but there are other explanations. This person is having some pretty severe medical issues that are causing some cognitive and memory issues. It could very well be that they forgot that they had said something a month ago And so I think, kind of like what Charmaine said, is training myself to stop it as soon as I do it and recognize that I have stepped onto that path and stop before I walk all the way down the aisle. And I think that's one of the biggest things is training myself to catch that faster so that I can just stop in my tracks and then go, okay, I'm observing something, but is there another possible explanation? Is there a good reason? Get that benefit of the doubt for someone to where I can just stop and interrupt that pattern. And for me, it would really be just training myself to catch it fast and stop, just like if my state's wrong, right? If I start getting beat down on something, right, I need to change my state. I need to recognize it so I can change my state. But if I don't recognize it, I'm not changing anything. So for me personally, one of my takeaways on this is I need to write something down that I am looking at twice a day with all my other stuff, so that when I start to do that behavior, I'll stop it immediately instead of entertaining it in autopilot, I guess.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. And I think, and then when we do catch it, I think it's good to zoom out and think big picture, be mindful, which is what you did. You're like, hey, we don't know the full story here. Like, let's not jump to harsh judgmental conclusions, but let's maybe have some compassion for the reality this individual is going through.
Right.
So I applaud you on that. I think that's awesome. And when you do mix something like this in, like a twice a day check-in, it's best to stack it with a habit you already have. Right? Like for myself, it's brushing my teeth. I will hang up a reminder on the bathroom mirror for whatever it is that whatever wisdom I'm trying to just grasp and have become a part of me at that time. I just hang it and I stare at it when I'm brushing my teeth. Right? Nice. Because, but that's one of the easy ways to blend it in. Chris.
I like the point that Steve brought up about the body going on autopilot. I've been listening to an audiobook by Joel Dispenza about how to break the habit of being yourself. And one of the aspects he brings up is that our bodies and minds are so well connected that if we have an attitude or a negative attitude or something like that, for a while, it starts to get programmed into our bodies. Our bodies expecting those chemicals to be there all the time. And then what happens is that the body starts to tell the mind what it needs to continue to function normally. Oh, I needed these chemicals, these negative soup chemicals, but I just need these because they're, those are the soup chemicals I need. So then the brain starts to give that. And then whenever we try to wake up from that, like Steve says, well, stop, wait a second. Is that person lying, or are they just having, they just forgot what they said a month ago? The body starts to rebel against that a little bit because it has redefined itself, recreating its cells to always receive those negative chemicals. So when you're talking about being on autopilot, our body sometimes puts us on autopilot, but then we wake up and say we want to do things differently. Our body says, well, we've been doing it this way for so long, we got it, go back to sleep. And sometimes we go back to that autopilot. So when we have that moment to think of a different question to ask as a pattern interrupt, like your brilliant way of saying my wife yells at me because I leave the cupboards open. It interrupted the whole flow of his conversation of judging this guy. It had nothing to do with the conversation whatsoever. And it made people have to think and process in a different way for them to, like you said, it's just a pattern interrupters. I just even blanked out on trying to explain it. So it was a great way of making that pattern interrupt. And I think that's what we're talking about with a good strategy to break negative judgment is using pattern interrupts by focusing on something completely different away from the subject, self-effacing, as you say, so that way you're offering yourself up as a sacrifice So it takes the pressure and spotlight away from the other person who's being directed at. And it allows you to have better control over that situation, so that the person's being attacked or maligned through this negative judgment is no longer the focus. You become the focus. You're in a different state. You're seeing it more objectively, and you can handle that better, where the other person might be more emotionally upset and not be able to handle it, and is following their own emotional program at that point.
Excellent. You brought up a really good point about the pattern interrupt, right? And I think another point I would add to this as well is that pattern interrupt is one thing. And I think another part is to do the foundational work to overcome the consciousness of negative judgment. So I think on a whole other level, if we can just train ourselves to see everyone out there as an extension of ourselves, as a part of our greater self, how we're all interconnected, we're all a part of each other's lives, or just to be able to see them as a spiritual brother or sister and hold that consciousness in mind, then we're less likely to even have these things come up. It's just not a part of our consciousness. So I think there's also like preparatory work so that we don't even fall into these habits, right? Overcoming these perspectives we have. And then there's the whole idea of being aware and stopping and interrupting the pattern. And I think a blend of these will be most advantageous to everybody. Joel, thoughts?
Really the one that stuck with me the most was what you said about asking yourself, like, what am I afraid of here? Because I think when you're able to turn it back on yourself and just, because obviously it is just something that's in your consciousness that you're dealing with. And I think that really, I don't know, puts it in a aspect of humility for me to just say, hey, what is the challenge that what is it that I'm really working on here that needs to be worked out? So it takes it off the person, that you think it's about, and putting it back where it really belongs with dealing it with yourself.
Yeah. So it's like, excellent. So you might even say, what am I afraid of? Like, am I finding fault in order to distract myself from my own insecurities? Right? And am I projecting my own weaknesses onto them? Right. So I think those are some good thoughts to keep in mind. And then I think in addition to all these, there was a method I read about in Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty, and it was a 10-to-1 ratio that he was taught by his spiritual teacher, that you keep a tally of every negative judgment or criticism of others, and then for each one you have to write down 10 good things about the person. Right? So if we're doing this self-awareness drill, it's like, oh man, every time I catch myself negatively judging, I got to write down 10 good things about the person. I think that's an awesome drill. I can't wait to get started on it. I'm going to start on it this week and see what happens.
It's kind of like if there was a such thing as a good punishment.
Yeah. Because we're training our perspective, right? And I think another thing too is, like, some people might be painfully ignorant in a way. They create a lot of trouble for everyone else and a lot of unnecessary headaches for everybody. But I think a good perspective is to really respect how they can be a gold medal athlete at ignorance. Like, in their own way, they're like a real champion athlete at being ignorant. I told somebody to look at somebody they were working with in that light, and they actually found like a peaceful acceptance with the situation. Like, because they just changed their expectations. It shifted to acceptance. Like, this person's role in life is to be a gold medal athlete at ignorance, so we can all learn compassion. All right? They're actually giving you an assist in the game of life. Talk about a reframe, right? So to conclude, negatively judging and criticizing others is a bad idea for so many reasons, including that it blocks our own progress. Why are we here? We're not here to just fight to stay the same. We're here to evolve and progress. It blocks our happiness. It blocks our ability to help others. Those are really important things to us, right? And some of the key attitudes is that it's best to love everyone the way they are. We're all on our own journey. We're not qualified to be judging other people, right? We're very similar to them. You know, they're like spiritual brothers or sisters. Life is just an experiment. We're all figuring out through experience what works best for us. We all deserve respect as we go through this journey. We're all a work in progress at this time, right? When we're negatively judging others, we should see it as a projection of what's going on inside us so we can heal that part of ourselves and be productive there. We should realize that it's within our control to change ourselves to change the situation that we find disagreeable, and that we need to just pay attention, stop ourselves in the act, interrupt the pattern, replace it with something better, be mindful, think big picture, you know, think about how this is a reflection of our own insecurities, and then do some of the preparation work otherwise to help shift that judgmental consciousness. Just be able to see the good in others and train ourselves to do that. We need to discipline ourselves, get rid of those animal-like instincts that are just reactive and impulsive, and replace it with something more elevated. And I think,
Well, kind of like you said too about trading expectations. I think a lot of times we just expect things to be different, and that's always been a huge help to me when my expectations haven't been met. Is just to, like Tony Robbins says, to trade your expectations for appreciation, just to go into a place of gratitude and just and be humbling. You talked a lot about the ego. It's very humbling to just appreciate and to see that there's bigger things at work, and to see that we're just a small part of it, and not that we have to be the director, the master, the gatekeeper of everything in life. So yeah, that just really helped me a lot to get to a place of gratitude and just take it off of judgment.
Love it. Any other key takeaways from anyone else?
I think also when you take your ego out of it, it is also a retreat from it as well. It doesn't necessarily have to become a kumbaya moment where you have to appreciate that person necessarily, but it also allows you just to withdraw. And sometimes just being able to withdraw from the situation allows you to become neutral. So you don't necessarily have to constantly address it with niceties and positiveness, but just by withdrawing itself, you can move on to something else and totally delete and ignore the judgment that you're having of this person, which allows you to go focus on other things and allows that person to go fix it, because clearly they've already gotten the point if you're already in negative judgment mode.
Exactly. Just like a balloon, you can just release it.
Yep.
And then continue on with something better. All right. Steve, any key takeaways?
Well, I think, it was funny when I was just kind of looking back on my notes from a few minutes ago, and we were talking about, observing without judging and just kind of releasing that. And one of my, I've been doing a thing this year where I've got 12 words, and I kind of roll the dice. Charmaine and I have kind of talked about this, and I roll a word. And today's word was actually release. And, sometimes I'm trying to either let go of, something that's bothering me or something like that. But this kind of gave me a new level application of when that word comes up of, using that as a way to, stop that autopilot, and just say, okay, I may come across someone today. I may see something that I don't agree with, or, behavior that would normally, drive me nuts or cause me to say, what a dumbass or whatever. And, I'm going to let that go. So it was, for me, that was just kind of a good next level application of something that I'm, already trying to work on a little bit.
Well, kudos for prioritizing that, right? You're majoring in the major things of life, right? Like that's the goal, because we're often putting all of our focus into the little stuff that doesn't really mean anything in the big picture.
Right.
Right? Like,
Or we're putting our focus into judging what other people are doing and not taking care of our own stuff.
you know what? I mean, sometimes
It's a distraction.
we have to laugh at ourselves for doing this, right? Because it's sometimes we realize that as much as we want this to be a glorious, epic movie, sometimes our lives are like a comedy show. It's a comedy reality show. Like, it is what it is. You know, my life is just and planet Earth is the insane asylum of the solar system. And this is a comedy reality show, right? Like, and this is the silly things. We're like sleepwalkers sleepwalking off a cliff. We're not paying attention. We're negatively judging people, getting further entrenched in self-righteousness and ego and all the things that block our joy and happiness and everything else. Like, it's comical that sometimes we do this to ourselves.
Well, and it just kind of dawned on me too, right? If I want to try to become the best version of myself, spending all my energy focusing on other people and what is wrong with them means I'm not focused on myself and trying to just clean my own house, right? I got to put my own house in order. And, there's a lot of stuff that, I want to go try, or things I want to learn, in my life, or things I want to remember, that I used to know about, different subjects like astronomy and science and different things that I don't use and I've forgotten, and I really want to go back and learn those. But if I am spending my time trying to figure out what's wrong with everyone else, then I'm not putting that energy back on me, right? And it's almost like an on-off, light, dark, it's one way. And if I'm focused on just trying to clean up my front yard, then I don't have to worry what someone else's front yard looks like.
Well, it's pretty easy too, just to look at the people that spend all their time judging other people and see what quality of life they live.
Right.
And if that's a quality of life you want for yourself, because it's not for me.
Yeah, there's lots of life examples of how it's turned out for people who do that, who are out there typing mean criticisms and doing different things like that. And I think, I always just try to think to myself how that person doing that has so much potential, that if they if they put the dedication and focus into improving themselves the same way they've been so dedicated and focused on humiliating other people, they go from sinner to saint, right? Like, I always just think of that. And I hope one day they see that potential in themselves, right? Charmaine, any key takeaways from you?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about if we can have an attitude of curiosity. And I think so often we get intent on saying, here's what I want to say to someone, or here's what I want to communicate. And if we could approach it from curiosity and ask questions instead, you can do that the wrong way too. Don't get me wrong. Why on earth would you do that? That kind of thing. But if we shift it to where we're curious and trying to information gather or understand, it completely shifts the conversation. And it really does take your ego out of it naturally if you approach it from that perspective. And I think that's a good attitude for me to focus on having when I'm talking to someone, because you do get a lot more openness from people if you approach it from that perspective as well.
Yeah, I love it. So I think one of the key things that we discussed a lot here tonight, and I think the best thing to do is just for everyone here and anyone who might be watching, just to take just one or two tidbits and put it into practice this week. Ask yourself, what's one or two things I liked, and how can I live that wisdom more deeply this week? And once again, just experiment with it. If you try the release technique and it doesn't work, well, maybe you do something that's just a little bit more positive focused, right? Or whatever it is. But I think that's the idea here, is we're just sharing a lot of different wise and worthy experiments so that we can overcome the struggle that is shared by all of us. The temptation.
I like the idea of the 10 compliments you have to do.
Yeah.
The 10 positive things you have to see.
I did that. Was it a couple years ago? No, it was a lot. It actually, even before I read about it in the book, I did this. I did this many years ago. I remember I did it for somebody, and I could never look at them the same way again. Like, it was just like, I just liked them from that moment on. I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago. I did something similar like to this, and I just couldn't didn't have that same view towards them, right? Because I was also more aware of their higher potential and just more hyper aware of the things I appreciated about them. So I almost like just completely changed my filter. So then just when I saw that person, I was just like, this is weird. Nothing's changed, but for some reason, I just kind of like them now. So, all right. Awesome work out there today, everybody. And I think, I thank you all on behalf of anyone who might watch this recording in future, because we're just here to help and share whatever we can to benefit everybody as a gesture of love to the shared human condition and the fact that spiritually we're all friends on some level, and we're all going through this just trying to figure it all out as we go. And I think one of the best things for all of us is if we could just accept each other a little bit better, and instead of judging, and start to work together as more of a team humanity rather than dividing ourselves. And I think we'll all be a lot happier in the end. So that being said, let's do go team on 3. Everybody ready? Fist bump. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Go team.
Go
Go
team.
team. Go team. Go team.
Bye, guys. Have a good week.
You too.
You
Take
too.
care.
A blessed
Have a
week.
great week, guys. Love you guys.